Go live, Ryan.
Okay, Representative Kinner,
Here.
Representative Larson, Representative Schwartz, Representative Simpson,
Here.
Representative Stith,
Here.
Representative Walters,
Here.
Chairman Nicholas.
Here. Okay, welcome, everybody. Welcome, Representative Dr. Hallinan. Glad to have you here. We'll start off on re-referrals to kind of get those out of the way. We'll start with House Joint Resolution 3. So please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and distinguished group. I bring you House Joint Resolution 3. That's a bill that you've seen before. We've had it. We passed it last session. I'll just go over the bill a little bit with you. I think you probably remember what it had in it. That takes the state land royalties. The state lands royalties now are divided into three segments. Two segments. One segment of 1/3 of that money is used by the legislature for schools. 2/3 is put into the common school account. Currently, the state lands royalties by the last Craig report equal about $62 million. So this bill would take 1/3 of that 2/3 that goes into the common school account and makes it available to the legislature for the next 6 years to use for schools. So 2/3 of the money would be available to the legislature to use. 1/3 would still be deposited into the common school account. I've done calculations of that common school account. What would happen to that account over the next 6 years? And this amount that would still be put into the common school account, about $162 million by the most recent Craig report, would add to the common school account. That plus the amount of money that would go into this common school account from the capital gains on the money that's in there now, that's not going to be redeemed. That money would equal the amount of inflation for the next 6 years. I used the last 9 years' calculations to come up with these numbers. So there would be no loss in terms of inflation to the common school account by taking an additional 1/3 and making it available to the schools. The total amount, according to the last Craig report, of that 6 years would be $162 million that would be made available to the legislature by taking that 1/3 out of the state lands royalties. So $162 million without a tax increase would be made available to the legislature to use for schools in the next 6 years. So with that, that pretty much tells the story about the bill, Mr. Chairman, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody may have.
Questions? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I noticed in the fiscal note, the Secretary of State's office estimates it will cost about $82,000 for this to be on the ballot, yet there is no section in the bill to pay for that. Do you just anticipate that funding coming somehow out of the Secretary of State's budget? Typically, a resolution like this would have another section that says there is allocated X number, 82,000 in this case, from the general fund to pay for the printing of this on the ballot or pay for this ballot. And so what is your plan?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would answer to that by saying I really didn't give a whole lot of thought to that part of the bill, to be honest with you. I thought that that would be available out of the Secretary of State's appropriation, and I didn't really calculate a way to pay for that. I guess we could.
So I think that we have the authority on a re-referral to add a section to pay for it. So I think that's what we need to do.
Pardon me?
So this is a re-referral, but on a re-referral, we can add that section and pay for it.
Okay,
So I think, is that okay with you if we do that?
that's fine with me, sir.
All right. Okay. Not that I like the bill. So, any other questions for Doc? No. So my question, Representative Hallinan, is by doing this and making this available for education cash flow, we slow down contributions to the permanent fund, which frankly is underfunded because we'd like to have the permanent fund larger in order to have more guaranteed income coming out of it. And because the rate of returns are lower, it's even more important now that we have, that fund gets larger so education can be better funded. So what's your thinking of, by doing this, we're basically taking 162 million for ongoing expenses, whereas, and we're decreasing the size of what the permanent fund's going to be by 162 million. And is that the right, and why do you think that's the right thing to do? I'm just curious.
Well, Mr. Chairman, that's why I did that calculation about the effect of inflation on the common school account. And the finding was that $60 million would be added over and above the amount of inflation. So the total amount that would be the common school account, I would estimate would be, about $4.5 billion in the end of the 6 years. $4.5 billion. And that would give a significant amount of addition to the schools on an annual basis in terms of their interest and dividends. I think that the needs at the current time in the school budget warrant that kind of a change, to use that money now as opposed to adding another $162 million into that common school account in the next 6 years. That's why I picked the 6 years amount, because I think that gives, now see, the legislature still can put more money. They can use that 162 million that they get out of using this extra third, and they can put that into the common school account by their decision at that time. They would not be forced to use it on current needs. They could put it into the common school account still if they felt that it was necessary to do that. So it gives the legislature an option of what to do with their money. Do they want to put it into the common school account, or would they want to use it on the current needs? And right now, I think the current needs are superior. So for that reason, I'd be in favor of this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, anything else? Any further questions? Representative.
Representative Hallinan, Mr. Chairman. The chairman offered to put a clause in there, a paragraph about adding the $18,000, and that would be appropriated to the Secretary of State's office to execute it if the bill passes. I just want to, your assumption was the Secretary of State would just absorb those costs.
Yeah.
Are you worried when you have an appropriation on there that all of a sudden people who are totally opposed to any appropriations might vote no on the bill?
My hearing is not very good, Representative Simpson.
I'll try
Mr.
to get-
Chairman.
I'll try to talk louder. How's
Okay.
that? Dr. Hallinan, we've offered to put the $18,000 for printing in the bill, but it's not going to be an appropriation. Are you worried about members of the House who are opposed to all appropriations, any additional spending? Or are you worried about losing their vote on the floor because now there's an appropriation attached to it?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Simpson. I must say that I'm one of the people that doesn't really like to spend much money in the legislature. I think you probably know that. But I think this is worth it. And I think I can describe the bill in a way that would convince people that it's a worthy cause. I think that does give the people an opportunity to vote on something. It's something that is of concern right now. I get all kinds of postcards from teachers and people in the education community. They want to have some money. And I think this gives them an opportunity to see whether the people of Wyoming want to give them that money. And I think it's a good idea to do now. Give the folks a chance to vote on it. And I think that they will approve this amendment if they get that chance. Thank you, Mr. Simpson.
Okay. Any further questions? All right. Thank you. Appreciate you being with us. Any public comment? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. We have a motion. Moved by Representative Larson, seconded by Representative, what the hell's your name? Walters? Discussion. Yes. Yeah, let's take it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I may, I'd like to offer an amendment. And I would move, the amendment would be on page 3, adding a section 3. And that amendment would say there is $82,000 appropriated for the purposes of this ballot initiative. And LSO legal has better language in that, but that's the concept. It's to the Secretary of State's office to pay for the printing and the necessary costs that go with having this out there.
Second.
Okay.
Mr.
All
Chairman,
those in.
can he repeat that, please? 82,000.
$82,000, Mr. Chairman,
Right.
from the general fund to pay for this on the ballot. And I will get you the more precise language.
Yeah, this was what I was concerned about. Okay.
And it's typical language, essentially. So if you look at the fiscal note on the back, it's $82,000 in order to pay for, and it's appropriated to the Secretary of State's office in the event that this bill passes, to pay for the publication for the constitutional amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, that motion carries. Back on the bill. Any further motions?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
just discussion. I'm listed as a co-sponsor on the bill, so I support it. And I think that the fund right now has a principal corpus of over $4 billion. I think that as we adopt a model, I don't think that reducing the contribution by $30 million a year will materially adversely affect the corpus of the trust fund. And it goes some way toward solving this structural K-12 education finance deficit that we have. And so as a result of that, I think that it makes sense to have the funds available because we can raise money for education without having to raise taxes. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, although I agree with Representative Stith, and I appreciate Doc Hallinan's always looking at ways to fill in the gaps, I think the thing that we do need to look at as we move forward is how we structure the various budgets that we have. And we set up the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, we set up the Capital School Fund to have revenue coming into them. Then at some point when we start deviating from that, we certainly dilute the intent of how they were created. And it was kind of like in 2016, when some of us, our first year on this committee, we shuffled a lot of general fund money that year. In fact, I think that was the year we took that full 30% of royalties and state and put it over into covering education. But prior to that, some of that was going to the general fund, some was going to that. And so we made them, what we done that year is we said our budget is going to be such, and so we reduced costs to fit what our revenues were going to be for the general fund. And then we've seen this this erosion or this attempt to erode the foundation of what our general fund is and of these others, because if we could just take, we can borrow, if we can just take a little bit here and patch this over here, it'll be really good. And really what we're doing is this shuffle thing. We're taking money, as what Chairman Nicholas says, which actually gonna, if put in place, will generate more income to be used. But in fairness, this would be filling a gap. I think they're all noble reasons. But at the end of the day, we only have a limited amount of money. And so we're robbing Peter to pay Paul to some degree. And until we come to some point where we say either things get better or we find other ways to generate revenue, but we're really only shuffling stuff around and we really haven't solved the problem, which is to generate more revenue.
So any other questions?
Would you
Comments?
agree?
Yes. Okay, roll call.
Representative Kinner,
Aye.
Representative Larson, Representative Schwartz, Representative Simpson,
Aye.
Representative Stith,
Aye.
Representative Walters, Chairman Nicholas.
No.
6 ayes, 1 no.
You're welcome. All right. It's our pleasure. Okay, let's go to 24. Transportation Computer System. And this is a joint transportation bill. Basically, this is what, there it is.
Yes, we do.
Our esteemed alumni.
Mr. Chairman, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, if I may ask the committee, there is a major amendment on this bill. If the committee has that amendment.
I don't have the amendment. Can you pull it up? Is it online?
I have a hard copy if,
We can run and make copies. So while she's making copies, why don't you tell us what the amendment does?
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, if I might, I'll start with the bill
Sure.
quickly and then go to the amendment. The bill is a way to fund the.
Can you get a little closer? Pull that mic a little closer, would you, Don?
Is that better, Mr. Chairman?
Just worried about people on YouTube not being able to hear you real well.
Okay, I like this arrangement. It's kind of like some sort of gulag.
Yeah, you can move. Yeah.
Okay.
You can stand up if you want.
Maybe, yeah. You probably still wouldn't be able to see me. So, Mr. Chairman, House Bill 24 was a way to fund the computer system that is ancient, does need replaced in the Department of Transportation. And I know the committee has heard this many times, so I don't want to go into great detail. What the bill does is takes,
The House had it funded last year, but it died in the Senate side.
yes, Mr. Chairman, I realize that. Adds $5 to fund it to the cost of a driver's license and adds $5 to the cost of vehicle registration, all vehicle registrations, with that money going to a fund that would pay for the computer system. Additionally, if you look at page 2 onto page 3, what it does is it lets that amount of collections out of both driver's license and vehicle registration continue until the chief executive says there's enough money. That's the bill in a nutshell as it exists. And the amendment that is being copied is a major revision to that funding. And I'll go into that, and I think the committee is familiar with with the current bill and the way that funding goes. We've seen this before with minor little changes. So the first thing that the amendment does is puts a sunset date on the money. Committee had an issue.
Sunset date on the increase in fees?
Correct, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Puts a sunset date of 5 years. One reason being that everyone renews their driver's license within a 5-year time frame. So in effect, every driver would contribute $5. That's the reason for the sunset date. There was uncomfortableness with letting this be open-ended and letting the executive branch make a decision, which really should be a legislative decision on how long this change in funding goes on. The rest of that amendment,
Mr. Chairman, questions as we go, or do you want to wait till the end?
I'm sorry.
Can we ask questions now, or do you want to
Oh,
wait
yeah,
till the end?
please do. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As to that sunset date that you're referring to, if that, reading the fiscal note, it generates $7.5 million a year, roughly the entirety of this bill. So that's $35 million neighborhood, give or take. And yet you're needing far more than that. So if you're needing more and we sunset it before the system is fully funded, what's the plan? Or I'm misinterpreting something.
Mr. Chairman?
Oh,
Okay, thank you. That's correct, but I'm not sure anyone knows exactly what this system will cost. We've heard fees.
40 to 60, yeah, roughly.
We've heard as high as now, it's as high as 70 million. The study done that was commissioned by the legislature, I think by this committee, I think it's Barry Dunn did it, said like 36.7 million. So I don't think anyone really knows how much this system will cost. And frankly, I do have problems with $70 million on this system, considering that the computer center west of here is looking at a new supercomputer that'll be one of the top 25 in the world, and their estimate is $35 million. So we have a transportation department wants a computer that's better than one that could put a person on Mars and bring them back. I do have an issue with that. So
could you, it'd be nice if you use that on the floor when you're discussing.
So that is part of the logic. So what the amendment does, and I think it's probably easier to go through the amendment in detail. And using my experience in this committee, besides the sunset date, the first thing the amendment does is takes the discretionary funds or contingency funds that the department gets from severance tax and directs a portion of that to go to this annually for 5 years, to go to the funding of the computer system. $2 million a year for 5 years is $10 million. And I'll, after I go over that, I'll give you the logic for why the committee did that. The next portion is to take just outright direct $3 million a year for 5 years out of the department's federal mineral royalties, again, to this computer system. So you have 15 million, you're up to 25 million. It reduces the fee per driver's license and vehicle registration to $250, which cuts the annual amount from, I'm going to round here, 8 million down to 4 million. 5 years, that's another $20 million. And that, so you're up to 45 million, which I think should be plenty. Now the bill, the committee also looked at doing a fund swap between YDOT and state parks, and good concept, but very difficult to make work. So in the amendment, just so the committee knows, I will probably divide the amendment on the floor and ask the body to vote those 3 paragraphs down. The other thing the amendment does is says that the department, YDOT and ETS will determine the usage of the system and in effect require those users, because it's not all YDOT. Department of Family Services use it, Workforce Services uses it, and some others. that they will contribute their percentage of use against $1 million for 5 years. And the $1 million, frankly, I'll be delicate here, I pulled out of the air because we had to put a number in there. So that will generate a little bit more money and give those agencies a stake in the game. So, and finally, what it does is says that the department can recoup any of those expenses to its severance tax and federal mineral royalty amounts. If they get any COVID funds, they can apply for COVID grants, and if they get any money, they can apply it back to those. And that's the description of the amendment, although it's a very long amendment. The logic to it was, in effect, that if this is a big enough issue for the department, that this computer system needs replaced now, then they should be willing to provide the money to do it. Sometimes you make a decision on funding one thing in favor of another. And my good colleague sitting right here brought it up during committee. Are we robbing Peter to pay Paul? And my answer is yes, we are. We're going to take about 15 miles of road off the table and apply it to this computer system. And if it's that big of a deal, we need to get it done now. And I feel that with the amendment, there's probably more than enough money to pay for a system that will do this. And additionally, there is some feeling that the state needs a new computer system, and the YDOT system would provide the basis for that. I disagree with that approach. If the state needs a new computer system, maybe the state should provide it and YDOT tie into it rather than the other way around. So, and with that, Mr. Chairman, glad to answer questions.
I was just wondering if you thought about doing a substitute bill so that, because it would be a heck of a lot easier for you to explain this on the bill.
Mr. Chairman, I did approach that issue with LSO, and they said they didn't feel that this was extensive enough to need a substitute bill. I thought it did also.
Yeah, well, sometimes the LSO is wrong.
Correct.
And so the portion where you take 2 million severance tax and 3 million FMRs, we can just direct them to do that. We actually don't need a bill to do that necessarily.
Correct, Mr. Chairman.
It just says that's where it comes from. We don't care where it comes from. That just means they got to pay $5 million a year, right? Out of their current budget.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, one of the thoughts we had was that if you put it in statute, then you know that there is going to be that, call it base amount of money. Over 5 years, you're looking at 25 million. And they can use that as almost a guarantee to go out and start getting bids on the system. If you just direct them, Mr. Chairman, then at some point in the future, you could direct them not to do it anymore. So if it's statute, that was the thought.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Burkhart, the three portions that you mentioned, or the 3 paragraphs that you were considering removing, does that relate to all the emails that we've been getting?
Mr. Chairman, yes, it does.
Okay.
Because if I might explain, the department head, State Parks, had seen a draft personal copy of the amendment that was not finalized. It was a conceptual amendment, and they chose to release that to the public. And that's why if you look at the 2 amendments, there's a considerable difference between those sections and that. And I've had a discussion with the department over that.
Okay, thank you, Representative Burkhart. But Mr. Chairman, a question then is, because that relates to some dollars, can we then in this committee remove that section? We can't, that's too far. Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Further questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Yep, go ahead.
Representative Burkhart, just, I think you're backwards. I think it's severance tax is 3 million and FMRs is 2 million. If you would please clarify, and that comes from page 1 onto the top of page 2 is the FMRs, and that shows it at 2 million, middle of the page on page 2. And the severance tax is middle of the page, page 4, showing 3 million. Not that it's a big deal, just wanted to make sure I wasn't misinterpreting.
Mr. Chairman, I stand corrected.
Okay, just double checking.
It's, Mr. Chairman, it's 5 million combined, and that's what I've been working from.
So Chairman Burkhart, the RIS fund or whatever we were going to call it that we set up, where's that parked at? Is that just parked in the auditor's office or is that parked in YDOT? And along with that, I guess the reason I ask is we're still scratching our head, as you point out, on how much that thing will cost and who's going to get the contract. And I just, I think knowing where those funds are going to be resting kind of gives me comfort knowing that they can't be prematurely appropriated for something.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, those funds would currently, as it stands now, rest in YDOT. The fund is applied to YDOT for this system.
Well, it would be the auditor that would hold the dollars.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I'm
So I think the auditor would hold the dollars, but it's all applied to what?
correct.
Yeah, and that was my question. I think we have it parked in the auditor's office and she can't draft a warrant until.
The
Okay,
only one that can call on it would be what?
yep.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, so the snowmobile portion of this amendment, if it's removed, how much money is that?
Mr. Chairman, that was part of the issue with that is that while it looked like a good idea to swap funds, neither agency can tell me exactly how much money there is. And my estimate was maybe around $1 million, but probably less a year. So, and does it make or break this bill? I would hope not, because again, we don't have an idea of what it really will cost.
You know, if we're going to raise the fees for 5 years or 4 years, why don't we just leave them in place and use the additional dollars where we need them?
Mr. Chairman, that's an interesting point of view. Mr. Chairman, however, this bill directs that they go to this fund.
Yeah, I know.
Again, that would mean an amendment saying that they stay in place, remove the sunset date, say something maybe after 5 years, they can be applied as the agency wants or as directed by the legislature, which would be my preference.
Yeah. So. Okay, further questions on the bill? Any public comment on the bill? Seeing no public comment, we'll close public comment. Do we have a motion on the bill?
Move to pass.
Moved by Representative Walter, seconded by Representative Stiff. Discussion. Yeah, so my inclination is to bring an amendment, bring a substitute bill where the money is used and after it's paid for and enough money is put aside for the ongoing operations of it. You know, usually these things have about a $500,000 cost to, for the provider that has an escalator clause in it just for maintenance and management of it. After we pay for that, and have the dollars then revert to the general fund after it's fully paid for. And take off the sunset and everything else. But it just makes sense to me. Once we're there, why wouldn't we go back? So I don't know if that, if you guys agree with me, but it just makes more sense to me. At any rate,
Mr. Chairman, if I might,
go ahead.
so is that a change the committee will do, or are you requesting that I do it?
I don't think we can do that on a re-referral. It's a little overbroad, but sometimes we do things that we can't, not supposed to do.
Mr. Chairman, if I might also add, testimony from the agency was that they can currently cover the operating expenses. And they would do it as they are currently doing, which is somewhere around 1.6 million a year
Annually, okay.
annually, yes.
Okay.
And that they didn't need additional money to cover those operating expenses, which,
Yeah. Well, and when I see $6.5 million kind of go by the wayside when we're in a budget shortfall, it doesn't make sense to me. Go ahead. I mean, I think you get our support, but it depends on what you want to do now.
Mr. Chairman, that is a possibility, is to re-refer it back to transportation. Have transportation.
Well, we could kick it out of here, but then it would go back to the floor, and then you could just have it re-referred back and do a substitute bill.
Yes,
if you're
Mr.
interested
Chairman,
in it.
That's,
Yeah.
yeah.
True. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, food for thought.
Mr.
I
Chairman,
resent that referral. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, is that how would I describe it? Informal recommendation of the committee?
I think it is.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Roll call.
Representative Kinner.
Aye.
Representative Larson. Representative Schwartz. Representative Simpson.
Aye.
Representative Stith.
Aye.
Representative Walters. Chairman Nicholas.
Aye.
All ayes.
So let me know what you want to do, because otherwise we can work on an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, if I might ask, then I take it that the committee approves of getting the money the way the amendment says?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Just curious.
I like it better than what you have.
Okay.
Okay, next let's do fuel tax. House Bill 26.
I think, Mr. Chairman, that bill may not technically have been re-referred, it's still in legal. I think the only other one we can do is 10. 26
Okay.
will probably have to be tomorrow night.
So I don't know that this had to come to us.
Pardon?
Okay.
Was it? Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
26 was actually re-referred this morning.
I thought so.
So, and there is an amendment on it.
And that's why we haven't gotten it yet, because that's still hung up in legal with the amendment.
Okay. So we can, because we don't have the amendment, do we? We'll do it
Mr.
tomorrow.
Chairman, I do have a copy of the amendment if you want that, but it has.
What's the committee's pleasure? Yeah, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, the copy of the amendment I have is indicated as it's a standing committee amendment. It has a standing committee amendment number on it.
Could be, I don't know. But you don't have the file.
I don't, but that's
So
okay.
The problem is she doesn't have it. So.
Okay. Understandable,
So we'll come back.
Mr. Chairman. I'll come back, or someone will.
Okay, let's go to House Bill 10. This is the COVID Large Business Relief Program. Are you going to do this one too? This is your day, isn't it?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chairman. I'm enjoying the camaraderie of being back in appropriations.
Okay, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Committee, House Bill 10 is a Minerals Committee bill. And it started last year around the time of the special session. The bill was drafted, passed out of committee then, anticipating a second special session, which never occurred. So since then, the bill has been reworked to accommodate potential COVID monies. And that's the reason for the amendment. And there are some other changes in there, but I'll go through the bill first. The concept with the bill was to give some of our largest businesses in the state, largest employers, some sort of relief from their COVID expenses. Just be blunt about it, our oil refineries, trona mines, and some others. There are a few hundred companies in the state that meet the employment requirements. However, when you look at some of the other stipulations, we are probably in the range of less than 50 companies meet all the requirements of the bill, and actually probably less than 30, which is paying $1 million in real taxes on real property or $10 million in payroll. And so this is a really limited bill for, again, some of our largest employers in the state. And some of those employers really have kept the economy going. I know that a local refinery kept all of their people employed at their own expense. So did some of the trona mines in order to keep the economy going. They ran it out of their own pocket, so to speak. And this provides some amount of relief for the expenses they had due to COVID. It's modeled after some of the other legislation we passed in the special session. There were certain stipulations put on the money. They were removed with an amendment, when I'll go through the amendment briefly. And one of those were payroll costs, business supplies, business equipment, to resume operations, rent, mortgage payment, utilities. And some of these companies, very large companies, experienced a loss of at least 40%. So, and most of the bill talks about that, and then talks about how the monies will be given to the companies. One thing it does do is it sets a specific time frame, which were 3 months, specified months in 2020 versus the same expenditures in 2019. Those months being April, May, and June of 2020 compared to April, May, and June of 2019. So that's kind of the bill in a nutshell. I go into more detail, but I think everyone remembers the relief bills we had passed during the special session, those 3 or 4 bills. So what the amendment does, because this had such a delay, and as now we're into 2021, and all the dates were into 2020 on that COVID money, what the amendment does was mostly take care of what has been referred to a covered period, which allows the use of any new federal monies that may come, or any monies that may come back from the CARES Act, to be used beyond December 30th, 2020. It defines that covered period as being rounded off and say the end of 2021. It also requires that the council accept applications over a 21-day period, and that after that they rank the businesses as to loss, percentage of loss, or added expenses. And the money is dispersed up to 1.5 million per business. There is a limit on that, based on that ranking order. The other thing is it requires a comparison of months, so that you're comparing everything the same, and that it deletes all of the individual requirements, as well as 2 paragraphs that were roughly, call them anti-double dipping requirements. And in effect, paragraph Romanet 5 says that you take all your earnings, all your losses, and you compare them, and what nets out is a net loss, and that's what it's based on. And there was renumbering. So that's the bill and the amendments briefly, and I would be glad to answer questions, which is probably a better way to address it.
So my question is, and I'm just kind of confused about it. It appears to me that, you're going to section 2, page 9, the bottom, we're reappropriating 10 million from any funds appropriated in the 2020 Wyoming Special Session Laws, Chapter 1, Section 2B, and is authorized and made available expenditure under 2C3. So that language suggests that these dollars are only coming from the CARES Act that was passed by Congress in March of last year, and not any potential new COVID CARES Act dollars. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, and I apologize. Could you tell me where you are? I have trouble hearing with.
Page 9 and 10,
Thank you.
section 2.
Okay.
And there may be an amendment to that language. That's what.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. The appropriation is for $10 million. It is limited. Originally, it was to come from any CARES money that remained after the 2020 special session. However, that's all a moot point at this point in time because 2020 is history. So,
But actually, it's not, because we now know that there's probably 115 million that's going
Okay.
to come back.
Mr. Chairman, we did not have that information when the bill went through committee. So that's why the amendment turns everything into a covered period rather than a period of time with specifics. Now, the covered period was intended to cover anything left over plus anything that new might come down the road. And I can understand the potential for an amendment to specify using old funds versus any potential new funds. In fact, using call it an existing CARES money that comes back, to me would be much better than, in effect, gambling on something that we don't know what will happen in the future. But not knowing any of those things when the committee passed out the bill and the amendment, some decisions were made to word it the way it was.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr.
Go
Chairman.
ahead.
So I guess I'm confused, but I think I'm getting closer. So it's anticipated really right now that this 10 million would be coming out of the extra 20 million that we talked about this morning?
No, it wouldn't be
Yeah.
the 20. It'd be, as it's currently drafted, it could come out of any.
Any of that, but we're aware of at least 20.
It
And
could,
then,
it could come out of the CARES Act 2 or the CARES Act 3 that is currently in Congress.
okay,
With the amendment
yeah, right.
language.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the amendment was written very broadly to be able to accommodate any of the various CARES Act that the money came from, whether it was old money, new money, potential. And that's why the wording is the way it is on the covered period as it's been defined.
Go ahead, Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious because I'm looking at the stipulation that any business that got PPP money from the federal government would be ineligible. And you referenced there weren't many companies that would be eligible in general for this bill. Do we know how much further that reduces the number of businesses?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I would estimate the number of companies that actually qualify under that is probably less than a dozen. That would be my estimate. However, if you look at the way the amendment is drafted, that stipulation has come out. And what it says is you take your losses, you subtract out of those losses any money you got from any other program. And then you figure out your expenses and whatever it nets out, that's a change in the amendment and that. So the amendment in effect covers the potential double dipping by saying that you can, it's a net loss. You calculate in effect your net loss, you add in all any monies you got otherwise, and whatever it nets out is where you list as a percentage reduction from those 3 months to the corresponding 3 months between 2019 in 2020. And that's what the amendment does. If you look at, Mr. Chairman, I believe you have Standing Committee Amendment number 1, which is a 2-page amendment. That's where, if you look on page 1, Romanet 5, that's how the calculation is to be made. That amendment was made at the request of the Business Council. They'll have to handle this, and that's where it indicates that they subtract out any federal, state funding that they receive or are scheduled to receive.
So was there any testimony from these large companies who explained that they would be eligible for these funds because they didn't take PPP dollars?
Mr. Chairman, there was. Some of the Trona companies did not take PPP money. The refinery
That
in
just
my
means they
district
didn't
did
qualify
not.
for them, right?
I'm sorry.
That means
Mr.
they didn't qualify for them.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. They were too large, had some other reasons, and just did not qualify for PPP money. Companies that were large but did take PPP money, they might qualify for this, but that PPP must come back out. They have to
Yeah.
indicate that as an ineffective
On the
earning
amendment.
against the loss.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
this is a topic you talked about just a moment ago, but I guess I'm confused about exactly the source of the funds, because it looks like on the amendment at the very bottom of the first page of the amendment, so page 7, line 7, says it's not just CARES Act 1, but it's CARES Act 1 and maybe CARES Act 2 could be the source of this funding. Seems like to say that at the bottom of the amendment, lines 40 to 43. But then, as the chairman noted before, on page 9, lines 21 to 23 don't get amended. And so it seems like there's an apparent inconsistency between the source of the funds, because page 9 seems to say that it comes out of CARES Act 1 only, but page 7 as amended say that it comes out of CARES 1 or CARES 2. So I'm just confused about where this $10 million is coming from.
I think page 9 is deleted, right? That component of it?
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe that the amendment deletes page 9, lines 21 to 23.
Mr. Chairman, if I might.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you look at the amendment, and I'm on page 2 of the amendment, line 31, it goes to page 9, line 19, and deletes the date, and instead inserts the last day of the covered period. Further on, it deletes any and inserts, that's line 23, unexpended, unobligated funds appropriated in the special session. That refers back to the potential to get some money back in the CARES Act. Then if you go on to page 10, line 12, puts a period after purpose and deletes the balance of the line, and then deletes lines 13 through 20. And then in line 21, you delete chapter 1, and line 22, it deletes the date and inserts on the last day of the covered period. That goes back to the definition of what the covered period is, and talks about pretty much CARES Act money, potentially CARES Act 2, maybe CARES Act 3. So that's how that was handled, again, with this covered period rather than specific dates, because no one was sure how much money might come back from CARES Act, how much money might be available from CARES Act 2, or for the potential to go into the future in a CARES Act 3.
So my question is, if we strike in the amendment, page 7, line 7, bottom of the page, where it says, or any other federal funding provided to the state of Wyoming in response to the COVID public health emergency, does that accomplish our goal of making sure that it's only CARES Act from 2020?
One moment, if I might, Mr. Chairman.
not sure I've got the other proposed amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I'm looking at Standing Committee Amendment number 1. It's a
Oh, sorry.
two-page amendment.
Here it is.
Uh,
This is our proposed amendment that I asked him. to
Oh,
put
okay,
together for today.
I don't think I have that. Back to your, Mr. Chairman, back to your question, though. I think that accomplishes what you've mentioned. However, there may need to be a change in the paragraph, starting on line 3,
Yeah.
page 1. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, now that I look at the two options in your proposed amendment, I think either would work. I think that would be a decision of the committee. When this bill was drafted and was voted out of committee just recently, last week, the committee did not have access to how much money may be coming back from the original CARES Act. So if there's money available, I would say that's a fine source. Probably makes this cleaner to take it out of existing CARES Act money rather than betting on what may be available in CARES Act 2 or potential CARES Act 3.
Okay, great. Any further questions for Don? Okay. We have a motion on the bill. Any public comment? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. Motion on the bill?
Move to pass, Mr. Chairman.
Move to pass. Discussion. Go ahead.
So we had a direct referral to the Senate File 50, the ag code, which, take off this coat of paint, put on another coat of paint, really was asking us to do the same thing that we're doing here. We know that there's at least one, maybe two more out there. There's one, I believe, that's wanting to come in and set aside X amount to make sure we get our internet, our broadband stuff done.
There's also one for 300 million that we haven't seen yet.
And one for 300 million. And so it kind of comes back to the conversation we had with Senate File 50, the ag COVID bill, is, if we bring these out and have the discussion on the floor and then we pass them, if we pass Senate File 50, and it was 50 million of
55.
of COVID dollars, and
Started
we've got them in a tranche, and then we bring this in, and then we've got that, what has priority over what? And I'm just not sure that, I think that they all have some validity to them. I just don't know that it's kind of and I'm not in any way trying to be derogatory, it's almost a little bit of a reactionary or a shotgun approach.
And Don and I and the chairman of Minerals talked about that this morning, and they're agreeable to limit this to the original COVID dollars. And so with this amendment, if we strike page 7, line 7, addition in the amendment, and if we add in this language, then basically we're saying 10 million is going to come from the original COVID dollars.
Fair enough, Mr. Chairman, but how is that any different?
It's different because this is kind of unique because this is basically like a fifth bill that we would have done in our special session last May. And what this is creating a separate account of 10 million of those dollars and saying, if those dollars come back, then there'll, of that 115 million, it does selectively take that money and spread it around to these particular entities.
And Mr. Chairman, my argument back then is we don't have all of the bills out there that are the greatest and latest and greatest bills that are going for this specific amount. And would we not be better? And I don't know how to do it. I guess more asking the question back of the committee is it seems to me that we would want to look at all of those options and then maybe make an assessment on,
So, but this is a re-referral to us. So-
I know.
So we can change the source of dollars, but we can't kill the bill. So what I want to do is change the source of dollars, because it definitely doesn't allow the new COVID dollars to be available for it. And then we can work our best to kill the bill on the floor under what you just talked about.
So,
well,
Mr.
I
Chairman,
don't, am I making sense?
Yeah, no,
So,
absolutely.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
if I
Chairman.
might add, I know there are two other bills out there. I'm not sure they've been numbered in yet. They've been submitted. One is a small business relief, and the wording is very similar to this. Small business relief with an appropriation similar to what is in the amendment, is covered period, for 200 million. And then there's an additional bill out there for loans up to 300 million.
Right.
Again, worded the same way. And Mr. Chairman, I've been asked to sign on to both of those bills,
And
and I
then
will probably not.
with those two bills, I believe those will be directly referred to us, so we'll be able to fix those more specifically. So at least that's my understanding.
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman, if I
Chairman.
might add for the committee, if there is appropriate or adequate money coming back from CARES Act 1, I think that's an acceptable source of funding if the committee feels that way. If we know the money is there and the committee wants to assign it to this, I think that's a much cleaner way to do it.
Yeah, we don't know when, well, those dollars that have been represented to us will show up within 90 to 120 days. So it's a shorter window before we get those funds to implement it through, but by the end of December, but all they have to do is make application. Representative Schwartz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I mean, I'm having the same problems that the vice chairman is having. And I'm going to have a hard time turning this into a question. But my questioning revolves around partly this lack of confidence about what the actual amount of money we're going to have related to leftover. Because you referred to the 115 million, but I'm looking, that I believe is FEMA reimbursement. And yet the note I made was that by and large, most of that money, they only had moderate confidence that it would actually be eligible for that reimbursement. So that just adds
More.
perhaps, I think, maybe I'm asking, even more uncertainty into how much money we're dealing with all these bills we're getting. And I don't know how we can rationalize picking one at this point.
Well, I agree. The problem is that this is a re-referral, so we don't get a pick.
So
Yeah.
my follow-up would be, we have the authority in a re-referral to change the dollar amount. So we reduce that dollar amount, perhaps, I would be asking to,
We could do that. We could,
to make it so we won't have as much a problem down the road.
well, we can make it $5.
Right, precisely. I would go a little higher. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think some of the sidebar discussions that we're having around the table are kind of coming to same thing, is that if we move the amendments to where it limited to COVID-1 remaining dollars, then stripped out on page 9 the amount, then that would give us the ability, the bill could pass to where the program is in place. Then if it passed, then we could fund it, but we could only fund it with COVID-1, and we could make a decision on, we could make a decision on how much of the COVID-1 it would get.
Excuse me, and I left my mic on, I apologize. Aren't we dealing with COVID-1 and 2? Because COVID-3 is the.
Not if we adopt the amendments.
Okay. I'm just confused on terminology, is what COVID-1, COVID-2, and COVID-3 are.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I might suggest again, what the two amendments that were brought up suggested that the language be changed to where they would only be able to use money left over as we currently have it to come into this program. So if we adopted both of them, then removed the amount of dollars there, then if the bill were to pass, which it's a legitimate bill, it actually is, then which is not surprising out of that committee, but you could then come back, because then we might have 3 or 4 of these bills out there and we would know what funds are available and then maybe how to fund them and give us some options. But I just think
So yeah, in other words, we could take out the amount and just create it and then come back and fill up the pot at a dollar amount that we, being the legislature, probably in a special session, will assign out of the funds that we anticipate coming back through the FEMA dollars. Is that what you're suggesting?
or left over, either FEMA dollars or left over, that's some. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
With that in mind, I would move to strike lines 40 to 44 on line 1 of the standing committee minute, and in that same amendment, adopt what's listed as option 2 on the other sheet.
Second, Mr. Chairman.
Moved and seconded. Do you understand the amendment?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
and I understand it. If I could offer one thing, just to help the committee with their deliberations. I know you have numerous bills to consider. And I don't know all of those bills. I haven't sat down and it's been a crazy weekend and read all of them. However, a potential compromise would be to then effect take all of those bills and just assign some sort of percentage of whatever might come back, depending on what the committee feels is the demand.
And Mr. Chairman, I think that's
just a concept.
no, I think that's exactly the kind of what we're thinking. We just don't know all the bills yet. And we don't know the,
Yeah, and it'll make a difference on how much we get back.
Yeah.
Because, so a percentage, if we only get back 40 million, it's going to be a different decision than if we get back 115 or 130. And so that's the issue. And what we want to do is not make that decision until we have a better understanding of how much we get back before we start putting numbers in it or percentages. Either way.
And Mr. Chairman, I understand that quandary for the committee.
Okay, back on the motion. Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, that motion carries. So did you get that, Mary Lee?
Let me clarify. So on the amendment, Amendment 1, delete lines 40 through 44. And then on your amendment, the ones with option 1 and option 2, we're going to add option 2 to that amendment. Right? That's the amendment. Take that out, put that in. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, then I have it.
Then is there any other motions?
Mr. Chairman?
Yep, go ahead.
If I might on that one, and I don't know, I would say it would probably be to talk to LSO and conform anything else in standing committee amendment number 1.
Yeah,
those
that's
changes.
probably a good idea. Just have it proofread.
Just a thought.
and then, Mr. Chairman, I would have the following amendment that on page 9, line 22 after business council, and I don't know just where to put that in here, but I'd like to remove the amount. And we have in there, as it reads, there's a reappropriate to the Wyoming Business Council $10 million. But we could just take out the 10 million and where it would read there is appropriated to the Wyoming Business Council blank X.
So should we put in language that says in an amount to be determined by the legislature?
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, you want to do something with page 7, line 3 also then? That's probably okay, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah, that could stay, I think.
Yeah.
So Mary Lee, did that make sense to you?
Right, you're going to take out the 10 million and put in, after business council, in an amount determined by the legislature.
Correct.
Okay? Was there a second? on-
And then also, let's just add to that motion and any other conforming language that complies with these two amendments. As we need to, that way we cover them, we don't have to come back. And then, so what we'll have to do is have this drafted up, and then we'll re-examine it again and walk through it probably tomorrow, the amendment, so we can see it before we do a final vote. I just think we ought to proofread it. Okay? All those in favor of the second amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, that motion carries. All right, Don,
Mr. Chairman?
we'll send it to you too if you want to proofread it with us.
Mr. Chairman, that was going to be my question, if you wanted me to come back to discuss that.
We'll just look at it, and then if you feel like you need to, then yeah, you're welcome to.
Okay.
All right?
Thank you.
Thank you. You were a man of many hats today.
Yeah.
More than you know.
Had I known you're gonna do all three, I would have done Landon first. Okay. Where are we? We're going back to the bill with the amendments, right?
Mr. Chairman,
that's-
do you have anything else for me this evening on
Nope.
referrals?
I don't believe so.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, committee, for your consideration and your
You
hard
bet.
work.
Thanks, Don. No, we're gonna review it. So. We are now on 133, is that right? Oh, 76. I'm sorry, that's what I meant. We had a draft amendment for this, is that right?
We do, and I think we do, Mr. Chairman, if it pleases you, if we could have Representative Brown, it's his language. And I think Representative Brown, if you could combine both of those into that one, where we had one amendment, that'd be great.
Mr. Chairman, I can do that. Let me go find, I'm just trying to go back to I don't have a copy of the one that I sent to your secretary, so give me just
Sure.
pull that up.
I have it right here.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Chairman, when we left this bill, it was basically, there was two verbiage amendments that we were looking at. Ultimately, what they were trying to do was just clean up the bill. But the first amendment, I would, for the committee's consideration, was a report back to the committee. And it was, the language that I was able to draft is, any impacted agency shall report to ETS a performance evaluation of this process, citing any savings garnered or inefficiencies noted in the process upon implementation of this legislation. A final report summarizing these findings shall be reported to the JAC by June 30th, 2022. And then on top of that, Mr. Chairman, the language that I sent to the secretary as well was page 3, line 20, before fees, insert credit or debit card. And that was in an effort to tidy up the language with some of the boards and commissions that had credit card fees or debit card fees already built into their. Page 3, line 20, before fees. Before fees. I don't have a copy of the bill right here with me, so.
Debit or credit card fees, yeah.
Actually, I do, Mr. Chairman. I have it right here. You didn't do that to Mr. Burke. You didn't do that to Chairman Burkhart,
He had
sir.
two different. Credit or debit
behind your ears.
For fees. That's the easy one.
And actually, Mr. Chairman, on that one with the debit and credit card, you already passed that amendment when we heard it the other day.
Okay, so that's
Okay.
in.
Yeah, that's in there already, as is the one on page 2, line 15. Mr. Stith changed it from shall to may. Those are already noted.
So by combining these two, do we have the language? Where it goes? Go ahead.
We do for the third one, what we haven't done, you haven't voted committee-wise on that
Right.
third language that he just read.
And that would be the language that I emailed the committee.
Mhm. Yeah, got it.
Mr.
Where's it
Chairman?
go?
What's that?
Where does it go?
Where does it go?
Yeah.
You know, Mr. Chairman, that was not directed to me. I didn't know that where we needed to put it. I guess I would leave that to LSO for drafting languages to, that might even be a new section based off of what's in here. It may be a section 2 and remove into a section 3. Based on the way that the bill reads, Mr. Chairman, I would believe that's actually what it would need to be. And then it would also probably require some language from LSO amending the title as well, requiring reports.
Yeah, probably.
And Mr. Chairman and Representative Brown, in your proposal, if we eliminated the word garnered and just said citing any savings, rather than be overly wording, is that okay with you?
Perfectly fine, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, what I'm going to suggest that, let's have this thing drafted. So we'll do it all conceptual, subject to the review of the final draft again. So in addition to the, as it relates to the third amendment, as presented, and then we'll look at it one more time. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? That motion carries. So I think we're set.
Okay.
And we'll give you another copy of it, but we'll kick it out tomorrow.
Okay.
All right.
Do you need me to return, Mr. Chairman?
I don't think so.
Okay.
We just want to see our work before it hits the, because Mary Lee, we need to have LSO just kind of find the right spot for that.
Right,
the third amendment.
yep, those are the notes I made, okay.
That's the thing.
Okay, now let's go to 133, is that right?
87.
87.
Mr. Chairman, where we left on this provider recruitment grant program is we had gone to section 2 on the repealer section and had questioned whether we wanted to repeal that or not, and maybe suggested maybe having a review. And we recall we visited with the department and they said they would get back to us. I went back and asked them, the Public Health Division, if we would be better off just to keep it as is and repeal it, or if they would like to have this subject to availability. They says they would really prefer to have the subject of availability. And so they come back with the amendment that I think you have here in front of you that refers to 35-1-101C. And it says, and in there it has new language that says subject to the availability of funds at the very beginning. The department shall solicit provider recruitment applications.
Okay. Everyone had a chance to have a quick peek at the amendment? Any further discussion on the amendment? All those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Mr. Chairman, do you say you think we ought to?
All those opposed? No? That motion carries. Any changes to the amendment?
Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the amendment that's in the big printing here, on the second line, so it starts out, subject to the availability of funds, the department shall solicit provider recruitment applications. I think we should change that shall to a may.
All those in favor,
Just
say
giving
aye.
them more flexibility is the reason.
All those opposed? That motion carries.
And so then, Mr. Chairman, that would probably go back, I would suspect, Mary Lee, they could have that would maybe change the bill title to not a repeal, but they're on the title, right?
So strike that. So also then you got to go to line 2, right?
Yes,
So amending, say, instead of repealing, you say amending.
amending.
Got
Mr.
that?
Chairman, can we go back a
Marley?
sec
Yeah,
to my honorable colleagues, Representative Walters' amendment to change a shall to may?
yes.
My concern, as I was discussing with my neighbor here, is that we started out with the availability of funds. So now what we're saying is they can have the funds, but they don't have to use them because it's a may. If we give them the funds, I want it to be a shall.
So Mr. Chairman, I get, the question is if there are funds available, do we want to require the department to solicit provider recruitment applications from the hospital? Or do we want that to be an option to them? Is that not the two questions, the may or the shall?
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, my problem is if it's a may, the shall, if there are funds available, that means we appropriated those funds. And it's, what are they doing with those funds? Okay, and I'll stop now.
It just gives them the ability to be selective on what they do with the funds. If they have limited dollars.
So, Mr. Chairman, I will repeat, I vote no on the amendment.
We heard you. Okay. So, and also, let's go, we also have to amend the bill title and change line 2, the first word repealing to amending. All those in favor of that amendment? All those opposed? That motion carries. Any other motions on the bill? Any other questions, Mary Lee?
I do. So we also, what are we doing with page 2, line 9, 8 and 9? Because we're no longer repealing 35-1-1101.
Right, well.
Change it to amended?
Yeah, delete, all those in favor of deleting lines 8 and 9, say aye. Those opposed, that motion carries. Thank you, Marilyn. Okay, anything else? As amended, roll call.
Representative Kinner.
Aye.
Representative Larson. Representative Schwartz. Representative Simpson.
Aye.
Representative Stith.
Aye.
Representative Walters.
Aye.
Chairman Nicholas.
Aye.
All ayes.
Maybe we did.
Well, and we didn't really have to ask, but if they're here, I think they would let us know. So, gentlemen, it's 7 o'clock. I'm going to suggest that we do 1:33 tomorrow. Is that all right? Because I have a birthday party that I got to cook dinner for.
Okay. Mr. Chairman,
'Cause it's-
when,
I think that's going to take us more than 10 minutes. All those in favor?
So when would that be, Mr. Chairman? When is the next?
Are we set to meet tomorrow? normally?
We are, you're going to do CapCon 121 tomorrow upon adjournment. So we'll add this one and then that other re-referral.
Okay.
And then if you get any
All right,
more
guys.
tomorrow.
That's what you've been here for, I can see. Any comments on the going to 3 versus 5? Yeah, okay. So my question is, do you want to do, I mean, I think you need to walk through the bill and listen so we understand it. Let's do that tomorrow. Okay, sorry about that.
No, no, this is good. Happy birthday to whoever.
Mr. Greer.
Oh, it's Mike's birthday, that's right.